Hi, welcome to My Comic Crush. I'm Vicky Sebring, and I love comics. So let's dive into a long box and see what we find. And with me this week is not only my co-host, Scott Sebring.
Hello there.
But we have a very special treat for you. Joining us today is one of the four horsemen of Groo, writer and director extraordinaire for TV, comics, books, you name it. Mark Evanier, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here. I'm actually in my own office, but I'm glad to be here metaphorically.
Metaphorically, yes. I'll take what I can get.
All right.
The miracles of Skype.
Technology is a good thing. I'm a huge Groo fan, have been. I first encountered him back in the Epic magazine before he actually got his own individual book. And I've loved him for such a long time. And I am so excited about the new Groo series coming out.
All right, good. I hope that's we sold one copy. Good. All right.
Oh, I'll get two.
Okay,
I'll get
good.
two.
All right.
Trust me.
We doubled our circulation. Good. All right.
Yes, one to bag and board and one to read.
Try reading the one that's already bagged and board. It's much better.
But I'm thrilled. It's a little over a month away. Preview night of Comic-Con. I'll be hunting it down.
All right.
I have to ask, how excited is Sergio for another number one?
Sergio believes all issues are number one. In fact, one time we're going to try to convince one of our publishers to just make every issue number one, and it'll be volume 1 number 1, volume 2 number 1, volume 3 number 1, and they didn't like this idea because they hadn't thought of it. So Sergio is very excited always about doing a new Groo story. He's, after all that we've done of these things, he still gets excited about, we come up with an idea that isn't exactly like what we've done before, and then it's just, we kind of do this comic to amuse each other. If it pleases other people, that's a bonus. But we just have fun doing it, and I hope it shows.
It does. It's so much fun to read. I mean, I was telling Scott earlier this week that Groo is like a ray of sunshine on a bad day. Well, maybe not Groo, but reading Groo.
Oh, yeah. Groo himself is a terrible thing to have come in.
No.
Yes.
You don't want to see him in person. You just want to read about his exploits. How did Groo first come into your life?
Well, I mean, Sergio and I were friends. We were talking for a while about doing projects together and fooling around with different ideas. At one point, we were going to do a book for DC, adapting the movie The Wiz. I actually started on it with another artist because Sergio pulled out of it, and then they found out that the movie was not going to be the sensation of the world they thought it was going to be, so that project was canceled. And Sergio wanted at that point very much to own his own character. A lot of his identity was wrapped up in being the guy in Mad Magazine, and he wanted to be the guy who created something. So he came up with a couple different ideas and played with them and doodled them a lot. And he was at the time a cast member on the new Laugh-In.
Wow.
This is the one that introduced Robin Williams to the world. It's not well remembered.
I remember it.
Yeah. Introduced Robin Williams to the world. And he started doodling this barbarian character, this stupid, klutzy barbarian. And he drew one story, a 2-pager, which had no dialogue in it, or actually had, I think, 1 word of dialogue in it. Just a pantomime story of his stupid barbarian. And around that time, there was a lawsuit. A very good friend of mine named Steve Gerber was enmeshed in a lawsuit with Marvel Comics over the ownership of Howard the Duck. Mm-hmm. And as occasionally happens in lawsuits, one party had a lot more money than the other party, and the lawsuit was getting too expensive for the other party. And Steve was on the verge of losing the suit, not because his case was not sound, but because he simply couldn't afford to keep up with the legal bills. So a bunch of us got together and did a benefit comic called Destroyer Duck. Dean Mulaney and Cat Ironwood of Eclipse Comics published it, and all of Steve's friends chipped in, and Steve and I co-edited the book, and we all donated our time, and the comic yielded enough cash for Steve to keep his lawsuit going long enough to arrive at what he considered a just settlement. When we were putting it together, I remembered that Sergio, being a big champion of creator rights, would want to be a part of it. And I remembered this 2-page Groo story he'd shown me. So I went up to his house he was in at the time, and I said, we're doing this book. We want a contribution. And he said, and he went over these big drawers he had of everything he'd drawn that hadn't been published. He says, opened up and said, take anything you want. And I dug through it. I found the 2-page Groo story. And I said, I want this. And we published the Groo story in there. That was the only Groo story, except for one late issue in our epic run, that I had nothing to do with. Sergio did it by himself because it was basically a wordless story. And it appeared in Destroyer Duck, and it got an enormous reaction. And people were calling Sergio saying, where can we see more of this character? Where we want to see more of him? What's going to happen to him next? And about that time, there was a company called Pacific Comics. And I suggested it. Sergio came to me and said, we got to do Groo, and I want you to help me with it, be my partner on it. And I said, fine, whatever you want, I'll do anything you want. Sergio and I have that kind of relationship. If I come up with something, he will do it. If he comes up with something, I will do it. We kind of blindly agree to these things, which has gotten us both in trouble at times.
That's the best type of friendship.
Yeah, and we went to Pacific Comics, and they published the first, I think, 8 issues. Then they went out of business. Then Eclipse published the next one, and then they had a flood and their company was destroyed. And then we went to Epic at Marvel, and the Epic line collapsed. But we did 120 issues there in 120 months. And I kept seeing all these people saying, creator-owned comics never come out on time. Excuse me. And then we went to Image, and then these guys started fighting, and we went over to Dark Horse. And for some reason, Dark Horse is still in business. And this is one of the advantages of creator-owned comics. The creator can take the book with him when he goes someplace else. It isn't a question of if we quit Groo, if we don't want to do Groo for some company, they would end up hiring someone else to write it and draw it. One of the joys of doing this comic is that it's just ours, and nobody else will ever do a story of Groo.
And that's the way it should be, because Groo's got this sort of feel to it. I mean, it's been the 4 of you and editors who come and go, who cares about them? But it's got that you go into Groo and you know what you're getting. It's like coming home. It's like putting on that comfy, fuzzy shirt that makes you feel great and is comfortable and makes you happy.
Well, we enjoy doing it. There were 5 of us involved in it over the years. The first batch of Pacific Comics were colored by a friend of mine named Gordon Kent, who just passed away last year, sadly. And Tom Luth took over as colorist, but it's been Sergio, Tom, Stan Sakai, who letters it, and myself, all these issues. And that's kind of the fun of it, because Groo is very consistent. I look at a lot of other characters who get passed around from writer to artist and such, and I like this version of Superman or that version of Batman, but there's so many variations that I really don't know who either of those characters are anymore. Groo has evolved over the years. Every so often, Sergio and I look at each other and go, oh, we just changed the comic. Something new came in that we didn't plan on, and it snuck up on us, like the way we added the dog form. That was not intended as a regular character. It was going to be for one issue, and suddenly we said, well, let's keep him around another issue, and let's keep him around another issue. And like some strays, he moved in forever. But I do a lot of TV stuff and animation work, and one of the problems of all those jobs is that by the time the show winds up on television, you look at it, you go, gee, I think I wrote that line, and ooh, that's kind of what I had in mind there, but the actor read it a different way, and oh, the artist drew that differently. And we look at Groo, and it's exactly what we planned. I mean, between us and the audience is about, is 3 people. And we don't have that problem of feeling distant from our own work that you get in television so often.
Well, I think that's part of why he endures so much. It's so much of what bothers me sometimes, having been a long-time comic collector, is I've collected for so long, and I know these characters, and then they shift and they get a new writer or whatever, and the characters, their core changes, and that just, then I lose the book. I lose something that I loved because they didn't stay true to themselves, whereas Groo is always true to himself.
I mean, there's a difference between evolving and just doing a total 180.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so, we just enjoy doing it tremendously, and it's a very comfortable thing, and I hope it, it transmits to the readers, and the readers are very loyal. We don't have as many fans as some comics do, but I have the feeling we have exactly the same people every month. I can,
Groo groupies.
If the sales figures dip by 3, I think, oh, the Johnson family is out of the country or something.
They'll pick it up when they come back.
That's right.
I have to say, one of the things I've always enjoyed also is the letters page. it's almost as much fun as the comic itself, and it's a different way. I remember there was one letter where the whole entire letter was flirp.
Oh yes,
Flirp.
yeah, I think I remember that. Yes,
from like Richard Flirp of Flirp, California, or whatever, and it's just it's got its own unique character. I really hope we're getting some form of Groograms in the new upcoming series because I'm really looking forward to
I
it.
think I just realized I haven't done a letter page for the first issue yet. I better find out if they're expecting one or, yeah. I got my start kind of in comic book letter pages, and I'm one of those people in the '60s who wrote letters to DC and Marvel, and I wrote them for a while, and I stopped writing because they kept rewriting the letters, trying to make them say the opposite, saying inserting more praise than I intended sometimes, but it still was a very formative thing for me as a writer, and I just loved being part of being able to pick up the new Green Lantern. I go, oh look, there's my name in it someplace, and so I want to do the letter pages, which have almost become extinct in comics these days. And we get the funniest readers. The letters are so clever sometimes. Although at one point I made really a incredibly stupid mistake. We had this running gag in the comic about cheese dip, Groo eating cheese dip. And I'm not even sure where that came from because neither Sergio nor I likes cheese dip. But Groo suddenly became a fan of cheese dip. So people started mailing us cheese dip. They started sending us little packets of cheese dip and little tins of cheese, little things. And it never got eaten because you're not going to eat something that comes to you from a stranger in the mail. And at that point, we were doing the books for Marvel, and the mail went to Marvel's mailroom in New York. And they would call up and say, we've got, some more cheese dip. Do you want us to forward it to you? No, I said, throw it away. So instead of making the next running gag about like Krugerrands or money, we made it about mulch. And people began sending in little baggies of mulch. And the people at Marvel were calling, will you please stop doing this? The mailroom is starting to really stink. And that's why we stopped doing mulch jokes, basically. But we had a lot of funny, I'll tell you, would you like to hear a story?
Yes, I love your stories.
Here's a story. I had a secretary back then when we were doing the early issues of Groo. I had a lady working for me named Tracy Abbott. She was an aspiring comedy writer, and she was apprenticing with me. And one of her many duties, she was doing typing and filing and running errands and such, and I was helping coach her as a comedy writer. And one of her duties was I would pick out the Groo letters. This is back when letters came in on paper. And I would pick out the Groo letters, and I'd say, okay, type these up. And I'd give her 8 letters or so. And we had one guy, if you go back in the epic issues and look, you'll find that I have no idea who this person was, but his name was Lon Wolf, Lonwolf. And he wrote these letters, I think, on yellow paper in longhand green ink. And they stood out. The letters just in the pile, they stood out. But they were also very funny letters. They were letters that suggested funny answers. So I printed a lot of Lon Wolf letters just because I had funny answers for them. So every time I'd hand Tracy a pile of the letters, she would go, oh, not another damn Lon Wolf letter. Oh, please, no more Lon Wolf letter. And she had nothing against the guy. She was just, she thought I was using too many of his letters or something like that. So finally, Tracy left me. She got a job. She had to move to New York, and she got a job as a writer on the David Letterman show back when on the old NBC days. And she moved to New York, takes her cats in a little carrier, takes everything she owns, moved to New York. And I kept, she was like my little sister. I kept, helping her out and giving her advice and such. So one morning I get up and there's this message, this upset message from Tracy. It sounds like she's hysterical on my voicemail. And it says, please call me. This is terrible. I didn't say this is terrible. She just sounded so upset. And I call her up at the David Letterman show offices. And she says to me, you remember how David Letterman used to do viewer mail on his show? She says to me, it's my first day here. I went in, I met Dave, and then they assigned me to write the viewer mail bits, and they handed me a whole pile of viewer mail. I get to my office, I open the package up, and the top letter is from Lon Wolf. and she was calling me. She was like, she wasn't crying, she was laughing that she moved 3,000 miles and was typing a Lon Wolf letter. Or I think a little better money than I paid her. But and sure enough, Lon Wolf got some letters on David Letterman's viewer mail. So
It's funny what a small world it can be
yeah,
sometimes.
so we got very clever readers, and sometimes so we put them in the letter page, and I mock them unmercifully or something like that. But they
We love it.
yeah. So
The readers absolutely love it. I have to ask, do either you or Sergio have some sort of a fear or hatred of boats? Is
no, that's actually another thing that just came out of nowhere. We did a story where Groo was on a ship and it sank just because he was Groo, and we decided, okay, let's make it a running thing. And at one point, Sergio and I were in Las Vegas together. We were doing a signing at a bookstore there, and it was a Christmas time. And we were walking past the Treasure Island Hotel on the Vegas Strip, and they have this. I don't know if they think they still have it there, but they had this giant pirate ship out front that would sink every 2 hours. They do a show there with pirates, and someone would do a cannon would shoot it, and the ship was made to sink actually under the water. But because it was Christmas, there were no shows that week, and they had drained the lagoon, and they were fixing the hydraulics. So we could see the hydraulics, all the little cams and levers and such that made the ship sink. And Sergio and I sat there looking at it, and we go, that's a Groo story. And it was one of the Image issues. It just came out. We just looked at that and went, somebody's got a device to make ships sink, raise, and lower. And I think it's like epic number 4 or 5 or 6, someplace in there. And
uh
so, that's how the stories come from sometimes.
oh well, I have to say one of my very favorite stories is when Grewly learns to read and he discovers the library and he winds up actually kind of living there. And then the library gets destroyed and he comes out with both swords and just because I identified so with that moment. I could feel because I love to read and I love libraries and I'm like, get him, Groo, get him, get
Yeah.
him. I love that storyline.
We never talked about it, but I think that had a little bit be underscoring it of Sergio's delight in learning English well enough to read books and such. I've been reading all my life. I was reading before I was supposed at the age where you're supposed to be able to read. And Sergio, of course, is a very bright man. He was reading in Spanish, but I think he went through a discovery process when he learned English well enough to read because all of a sudden a countless number of new books were available to him, new authors that he had never heard of before and such. And we never talked about that, but I always thought that somehow there was a little of him in that story that way.
Oh, well, I love it. And I was going back and rereading issues, and there was one that I reread, and I'm trying to remember the character's name because I've read so much prepping for this. But it just seems like you could take this story, and it's all about this character who decides to make himself king by blaming the king for everybody's troubles. And it just seemed so apropos to our current political situation. I was like, change the hair.
Yeah, well, we when we were talking about the new miniseries, for about 5 seconds we thought maybe we could do a character like Donald Trump, and then Sergio said, "We've already done too many characters who are um, uh, risen to power for the wrong reasons." None of the kings, the evil kings. We have a lot of evil kings in the comic. They never have attained power for any good reason. They were born into it, or they seized it, or whatever. And they're never particularly benevolent. And we just dropped that idea because it seemed we figured by the time we had it out, everybody would be doing Trump parodies.
It's probably true, and plus you were way ahead of the curve. Do you have a little book of sage sayings that you keep handy for reference, or you just figure them out as you go along?
Yeah, one of the fun things about Groo is it's so spontaneous. It's done just suddenly, without. I used to be involved a lot in teaching improv comedy, and I love and what Sergio does on the page is kind of improv comedy because he invents stuff as he goes, and sometimes surprises himself with what he's drawn. And if you ever saw us do Quick Draw at the Comic-Con San Diego, you'll know that because you can, if you watch him, I give him an assignment. He doesn't know what I'm going to ask him to draw, and he starts drawing. And then you can see the moment maybe on his face when he figures out the gag. He's halfway through the drawing, and he hasn't figured out what the gag is yet. There was one time I asked him to draw himself as Batman. and he starts drawing himself in a Batman suit, which was silly enough, but it wasn't enough of a gag. And he's drawing, and all of a sudden I saw his face light up, and he started putting pens on the utility belt. The utility belt was all drawing pens. And and he did not. I'm convinced he did not think of that before he started drawing. He got to the belt and he went, "Oh, I know what I can put on the belt." And that was it.
It revealed itself to him.
Well, he's just an amazing talent, and he draws so much, and he's so prolific, and we get along fairly well because I'm very fast and prolific too. I don't make any pretense to the quality, but I figured if you can't be brilliant, you can at least get it done fast. And I worked for a man you probably heard of named Jack Kirby, and he
Yes.
very brilliant and very prolific and a very hard worker. And I thought to myself, gee, I can't be as imaginative as this man, but I'll bet I could work that hard. So Serge, I learned that from Jack pretty much. And so we do the book and we just get surprised by what turns up. It's done very fast. There's really very little planning. I don't have a whole list of sage sayings. What happens is that Sergio will kind of say, Sage to say something like this here, and I'll just take it and put it into a silly context.
Well, I have to say, when I read the poems that you put in there in the beginnings and at the ends, I tend to hear Danny Kaye's voice. I can see him in his little minstrel suit, jester suit, and I hear him saying it.
The other night, Wednesday night, I went to see a friend of mine perform his cabaret act, and if we're going to do Groo in animation someday, I'm just convinced. And if I have a say, if I have a say in who does the voice of the minstrel, it's a friend of mine named Jason Groo, Graae. If you go to YouTube and search for him, you'll find him. He is a musical comedy performer. He was in the original Forever Plaid, and he's been on dozens of cast albums. And he was the voice of the Lucky Charms leprechaun for a while. And just when I'm writing the poems for the minstrel, I'm hearing Jason's voice in my head because he has a great way of phrasing things and a great devotion to the lyrics, uniting with the music. A lot of people who sing show tunes don't really know what they're singing. They don't understand that show tunes are acting exercises as much as they are vocal exercises. And it's particularly when you're trying to write a funny song, they're also comedy exercises, and you have to deliver the punchline like a comedian, not like a singer. And you have to be both at the same time. And so was it yesterday? Yesterday, Sergio was over here, and I showed him some video. He'd never seen Jason. We got to talk. I said, I saw this guy, Jason Groo. He's the guy I've been hearing for the minstrel. He said, oh, show it to me. So I showed him some videos of Jason, and he goes, yeah, that's the minstrel. That's what he sounds like. And we don't agree on what any of the other characters sound like except the minstrel. If you ever want to make your life real hard, just say, oh, let's have a character who talks in rhyme. It's the only time I take longer on a page than he does.
Well, I was going to ask if he's more challenging to write because of the dynamics of his speech. But I also wanted to ask, do you have like a process that you do for your writing? Do you have like set hours every day where you sit down, or do you just...
I write morning, noon, and nights. I tend to do the blog more in the morning, and I tend to do the scripts, whatever else I can, whenever they're due. I like to write at night because the phone doesn't ring. I'm one of those people who I decided when I was about 6, I wanted to be a writer, and I've never wanted to be anything else. I have friends who wanted to be astronauts and star in the world, pitch in the World Series, and now they probably feel like failures because they never got to do that. I aimed low, and here I am. But I just write all the time. I just write. I get in the morning. I make the long, hard trip from my bedroom to my office, which takes 20 seconds, and I sit down and I start writing something. I don't make any pretense to the quality of it because obviously that's so subjective, and I always am rarely satisfied with what comes up. But no, there's no process. I mean, it's just like I'm working on Groo tonight. In fact, I'm working on issue number 3 here, and after I finish talking to you, I'm going to answer some email, and I've got firm up my panels for Comic-Con. I got to work on some notes for those because I've got to send the stuff in for the program book next week, and then I'm going to do as many pages of Groo as I can before I get tired, and that's it, really.
Well, I have to say, you mentioned your blog. If you get the chance, people really check it out. It's newsforme.com. I really, really loved your essays on writing. Rejection, a wilderness guide for writers.
Yeah.
It's filled with great information for anybody who's interested in writing, but just great information in life in general. I really loved the things you were writing about point of view affecting your outcome in life, how you look at things, how you see it and approach things.
Well, a lot of that is learned from Mr. Kirby. Jack used to always use the term, the big picture. He used that term a lot, and we would be discussing an issue, and I would be very surprised by his take on it. He'd come up with an opinion on something that surprised me, and I didn't understand. He'd say, "Look at the bigger picture. Look at the big picture." And he would talk to Jack. Everything was a part of a mosaic, and I think it's one of the reasons he did those collages so well. He thought that way, and he would take it to the next level, and he would say, "Now imagine if we expand this." And then you understand, and then his viewpoint made more sense to me if you looked at it from a larger context. And I think that I learned over the years that I can't solve a problem if I can't really understand it. Whatever the problem is I have to sit down and really put it into the proper level, not make it too big a problem, not make it too small a problem. I've got to quantify it exactly to the right size. And then I've got to say, what's really happening here? If I'm upset about something, what am I upset about? What do I want to have happen? And very frequently I'll go, oh, maybe there isn't a problem here after all. Maybe I thought there was one. And when you gotta get in touch with what these things mean to you really, and what's at stake, what's the principle here. A couple of times, and I can't give you an example off the top of my head, I thought something was a big crisis, and I went, no, just let it happen. You don't have to stop this. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to fix it. And I think there's a problem for writers. Frequently, they get very emotional about their work, and the emotions cause them to make bad decisions. And in order to solve the problem or to succeed, you got to kind of understand what you're doing and why. And I've made these lectures so often to people, to friends of mine and such, that I thought, well, maybe I'll write these articles because I can, instead of telling the speech to somebody else, I can say, why don't you read that column I wrote? Or B, it helps me to clarify my thinking to put it down. It forces me to put it into very clear wordage so that somebody else can understand it. And writing what frequently are autobiographical stories on the blog sometimes causes me to look at an incident and go, oh, now I think I understand what happened better. In trying to explain to someone else, in trying to simplify it down and distill it to its basic elements and strip out all the frosting and trivia, you understand something better. And then you can solve it or not solve it. And you can also see the humor in it.
Well, I really want to thank you for taking the time out to speak to us today. I don't want to take up too much of your time tonight because I really want you to write the Groo.
It's going to get done. It's going to get done by Monday, no matter what. But no, that's not a problem, really. Thank you. I've met so many deadlines in my life that I've learned. A guy said to me once, that deadlines are like a bull. You're the bullfighter. It's the bull. You have to turn your back on it and show it no fear, and which is a good way to get gored. But
I do have one maybe a little odd question. I'm curious. Do you think in words or in pictures? Are you a visual thinker or do you think in words?
It depends what I'm writing. Literally, if I'm writing a monologue for someone, I think in voice. I think of the person's voice saying it, or if I don't know who the person is, I cast it in my head. And if I'm writing cartoons, I usually think of the visual. And if I'm writing prose, it depends on what you're doing. Years ago when I was writing, in my early days of comic books, I wrote a lot of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and Scooby-Doo and things like that. And I always felt I had an edge up on the guys writing the superhero comics because they didn't know what their characters sounded like. And the readers didn't know what their characters sounded like. The people who were reading Green Lantern comics had to make up their own voice for him. There was no established voice for Green Lantern. But everybody who was reading my Bugs Bunny comic book was hearing Mel Blanc in their head. And that was more fun to write that way because and then years later, one of my favorite human beings on this planet was a man named Dawes Butler, who was the voice of Yogi Bear, Huckleberry Hound, Quick Draw McGraw, Augie Doggy, Elroy Jetson, and about 9,000 other great characters. And he was one of the funniest, loveliest men who ever lived, and I got to be good friends with him. And I took him over some of the Yogi Bear comics I'd written, and he picked them up and started reading them aloud in Yogi's voice. And it was just such an amazing thing. And I sat there thinking, gee, I wish I'd rewritten that line, but that one really sounded like Yogi. And I later wrote some Yogi Bear specials and things like that, which he did. But it was so amazing to write for. I've in my life I've written for Sid Caesar. I've written for Jerry Lewis. I wrote for George Carlin on a show he was on one time. I mean, people like these people I admire. Bob Newhart, and it's a very great thrill to hear your words sound like that. And in the same way that when I wrote comic books that were drawn by Dan Spiegel or Kurt Swan or anybody like that, somebody I'd admired for years, I was just excited. I'd look at the comic book and I go, my God, this looks like a real comic book. And those are my words there. How did I fake them, fool them this time? So you bond with the people you work with. And in the case of Groo, Sergio and I, he keeps surprising me. It's always Sergio art. I look at it and I don't even think, because Sergio kind of roughs, he comes up with the basics of the stories usually and he puts them down there. But when he does the finished art, I think I know what he's going to do, and he always surprises me. But it's the thing that's amazing about it, if we've done, I don't know how many issues of Groo, 150 issues of Groo or something like that, more than that, and he's never repeated really anything. He's drawn Groo from every possible angle, every possible expression. He doesn't have a stock head or a stock pose. It's all very organic, and it just comes out of nowhere. He is such a brilliant cartoonist. A couple of times years ago, we haven't done this for a long time, he and I would go to schools and teach young kids how to draw. And Sergio is about 25,000 times the cartoonist I am. But when I draw, it looks humanly possible. I'm up there in front of the kids and I'm teaching them how to draw Charlie Brown, or teaching them how to draw Garfield, or teaching them how to draw Popeye or something like that. And they can understand the process because they say, oh, he does a circle, and then he divides it in half, and it looks like something that you could learn to do. When Sergio gets up there and starts drawing, nobody has any idea. He just, you ask him to draw Mount Rushmore, and he starts with Lincoln's nose and works out from there, and the drawing just happens out of nowhere, and there's no visible thought process there. The drawing just magically appears, and so it was I was kind of the before and he was the after. Here's what you can do if you don't study, kids. You can draw like this. Here's what you do if you might be able to do someday if you do study, just a brilliant man. And I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast, because he doesn't want to know how much I respect. If he learned how much I respect him, I would never get paid on this comic, I tell you.
What, he pays you finally?
Yes, he pays me. Yes, I get. People take
in Copins?
People take these jokes too seriously sometimes. I started a running gag in Groo at one point where I said Groo only has one joke in it. I was doing this in the letter pages. I was saying, hey, it's a good joke. We liked it. And I meant that the same way I think that all superhero comics have one plot. I mean, and so, but there are people who actually said to Sergio, I was going to buy Groo, but I hear it's only got one joke in it. And I think to myself, those people are not going to get this comic, no matter what it is. No,
they're not going to appreciate it.
Those are readers we were never going to get in the first place. But there's something about Groo that seems to evoke the Mad magazine style of belittling yourself, and Mad the usual gang of idiots, and it's more trash from Mad, And there's something about being around Sergio and all the Mad guys. I got to know most of the Mad magazine guys, and I wrote a few things for Mad. Another bonding thing from my childhood, being part of Mad magazine. There's something about it that since the character is so insulting and insulted and demeaned and treated badly, it just seemed appropriate for us to. And also, I think it's refreshing sometimes to have a comic that has a little humility about itself. Because a lot of them don't these days.
I wanted to backtrack just a little bit here because we were talking about Looney Tune characters and you writing some of the comic books for some of those characters. Vicky, you had a question about a particular coyote?
I did. I know that one of your many claims to fame is you wrote the issue where it is revealed that Wile E. Coyote's middle name is Ethelbert.
Yeah, this is that ended up being a Jeopardy question one time. I was writing the Roadrunner comic book for a while, and the Roadrunners spoke in rhyme. That's where I got stuck doing that the first time. I didn't know why they spoke at all, but they did speak in rhyme, and that was started by the same guys who did the cartoons. They were writing the comic books, and they thought, well, the Roadrunner has to speak if he's in a comic book. We might as well make him speak in rhyme. A very odd idea. And I did a story one time, one of, dozens and dozens of these stories where we revealed what the E stood for. I said it was Ethelbert. And I didn't think that was like establishing for all time, because I was doing a comic book where the Roadrunner talked and rhymed and had 3 kids. I mean, I didn't connect it to the whole Roadrunner mythos. I just thought it was a one-shot story, and I forgot completely about it. And then the next thing I know, 25 years later, somebody says, "Oh, your thing was on Jeopardy the other night." And I went, "Jeopardy? What was it?" They said, "Oh, well, Ethelbert." And I couldn't even remember a time where I got that. I did that. And I didn't mean to. I didn't intend that anybody would think that it was true outside the context of that 6-page story.
So Chuck Jones wasn't whispering in your ear, "By the way, his middle name is..."
No. And and the guy I replaced writing those comics, because he retired, was Michael Maltese, was the gag man on a lot of those cartoons. And I knew Michael Maltese, and I think I gave him a copy of that issue just to show what I was doing with the book after he left it. And he didn't say anything about it. So, but the comic books I thought were completely standalone. Well, there's not a firm mythos in the Warner Brothers world, because sometimes Bugs Bunny is at the time of Robin Hood, no explanation, he's just there. And sometimes he's in an opera, and sometimes he's on stage, singing Figaro, and whatever it is. And there's no attempt to match up the continuity. The Sylvester in the Tweety and Sylvester cartoons is not quite the same Sylvester as when Sylvester was hanging out with Porky Pig in his cartoons. And there's Sylvester didn't talk, and he was more like a cat, and he wasn't running around trying to eat Tweety. So they were all standalone cartoons that were meant to be seen in theaters months apart. It wasn't until fairly late in the 50s when it was possible to see cartoons every day and to see all the old ones on TV. And and half of those early ones were all full of beating up on Nazis. So I never really thought of those characters as having to be consistent from story to story, although at times they were. Sometimes Yosemite Sam was a pirate, and sometimes he was a cowboy, for no particular reason.
Well, it's been so wonderful to have you here as a guest. I really could listen to your stories all night long, but I really do want you to get those pages of Groo out tonight. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. And hopefully we'll see you at Comic-Con in the many throngs of your adoring crowds.
I will be there. Well, no, there be people coming to see the voice actors and the cartoonists. I'm just the interlocutor there. I take the old Ed Sullivan approach. You can look really good if you surround yourself with people who have talent. So,
well, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much,
Bradley. Anytime.
Thank you. Okay, well that wraps it up for now. For this week, I am still trying to come down from my fangirl. I want to take a moment to say, please do check out Mark's blog. It is really awesome. It's www.newsfromme.com. There's so many great stories on there. You'll love it. Trust me. Check it out. Also, check out his book, Kirby, King of Comics. It's got to be the definitive guide on Jack Kirby. Mark was actually his assistant when Mark first started into the business, and you can get it on Amazon. You can get it probably, just Google. You'll find it. It's worth it. Also, of course, as I always say, part of the reason I'm doing this is I want people to check out these comics that I have loved for so long. And, Groo is available in a ton of trade paperbacks. If you have never experienced Groo, it's time you experienced Groo. Groo is awesome. But so that's it. I'm going to stop the fangirl now, at least till next week. Until then, I'm Vicky Sebring.
And I'm Scott Sebring.
And this has been My Comic Crush. My Comic Crush is a production of Sebring Arts, executive producers Vicky Sebring and Scott Sebring, sound production and theme music by Scott Sebring, special guest provided by Blackmail and Shameless Baking. For more episodes in this series, you can visit our website at mycomiccrush.com or find us on iTunes, Podcast Republic, or wherever fine podcasts can be found. That's all for now, so go out and read something.